with Martin Kelner.
BBC Radio Leeds.
So delighted to say our one-on-one guest this afternoon is a guitarist and singer-songwriter. His work over the years has scooped him the hugely prestigious Ivor Novello Award. He's been in Lindisfarne, hugely popular band throughout the last 4 decades, on and off. It's Mr. Rod Clements. Rod, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you too.
And delighted to see you coming to our region. You're at the Halifax Square Chapel Arts Centre tomorrow, Saturday the 30th. It'd be brilliant to see you there. We're going to go back to, we'll tell a bit of your story, even pre-Lindisfarne, because you were into music from a very early age, were you not?
My early teens, actually. I think it was about the age of 13 or 14. I was away at boarding school in Durham at the time, and not having a great time of it, and rock and roll, I guess, came along and saved me. It gave me an outlet from the grey surroundings.
Indeed, that was a bit of an escape for you. I mean, why did you particularly hate? But I know you're sort of middle class upbringing, and your parents sent you away to school. Why did you particularly hate it? I'm just reading through what she sent us, and it makes it sound a bit like Doe the Boys Hall from Dickens or something.
Well, do you know, it wasn't actually unlike that, and it wasn't unlike Tom Brown's School Days, and it wasn't unlike Billy Bunter and all those things. And I'll tell you the reason why. That's because exactly what they were trying to copy. The whole ethos of the school was modelled on the idea of a fictitious classic English boys' public boarding school, and when I was there, it had all the old ingredients. It had fagging and
really,
fagging, corporal punishment from pupil on pupil, all of which I was subjected to.
Goodness me!
It's all radically different now. I mean, they tell me they even have girls there now.
Yeah. Which school was this?
It was Durham.
Yeah. And why did you... I mean, presumably your parents sent you there because it was a good education.
Well, presumably, yes. And presumably they saw it as something that would set me on the road for the career path or the life that they envisaged for me. I'm not blaming them particularly for this. It was just a typically aspirational move of the time. As I said, we weren't extravagantly well off. My father was a solicitor, local provincial solicitor, and I had a very conventional suburban upbringing. But if you wanted your children to do better, as I suppose people do, albeit in a different way nowadays, going away to public school and forging the connections, the old school tie and all that seemed like a good move.
Yeah, I mean, did the old school tie do anything for you at all?
Au contraire.
Yeah.
No, not at all. It's funny because, I just rejected the system and reacted against it any way I could. And, like I said, got into music, and I formed a band at school from, a few other like-minded fellow pupils, which was extremely frowned upon at the time. And they had to kind of... the school itself had to make adjustments to incorporate this revolutionary idea into what was going on at the school. I think we must have given the impression that we weren't to be deterred in this, because now, of course, kids forming bands, it's actually encouraged. It's a positive thing, and
it is, and it's mostly posh kids from public school who are forming the bands these days. Yeah. Well, look, we'll listen to one of the tunes that presumably first awakened your interest in rock and roll and in guitar playing. It's The Shadows and Apache, the first choice this afternoon of our special guest. It's always excellent, always great to hear it. Rod Clements is our guest, and these are The Shadows. Well, there's a tune that's sure to invoke great oodles full of nostalgia if you were born in the late 40s or the 50s, like our guest Rod Clements was. That was The Shadows and Apache, which it sort of awakened your interest in guitar playing. Tell me, you formed the band at at your public school, at Durham School. Do you remember what the band was called and what you used to do?
Yes, I do. The first band was called The Cyclones.
Good one.
Yeah, and we used to play, we used to try and copy the Shadows. We used to play guitar instrumentals. We did Sheila by Tommy Rowe. We did Brian Hyland, Ginny Come Lately, sort of guitar-oriented chart stuff of the time.
And what sort of a guitar did you play? What did you have in those days?
Oh, I had a very, very cheap acoustic from the local shop, and later on I had a separately bought pickup that I stuck onto it. Yeah. It was a very crude instrument. You still see them knocking about occasionally. But as soon as I could, I gravitated onto bass. The bass guitar held an appeal for me. Still does, actually, even though I'm back on the regular 6-string now.
Yeah, some people say that the bass guitar, it sort of melts. Do you know what I mean? Don't you? It sort of melts into the group a bit, and you think, well, the bass guitar's not really that. I know you're going to argue for the bass guitar, but it's not really as important as the other members of the. It's often the specky one in the group who plays bass guitar. Maybe I'm wrong.
Power behind the throne, mate. That's what it is. Yeah.
So, and from you formed this band, so you obviously knew at that stage that music was what you wanted to get into, but of course you then went to university, again, the sort of middle-class aspirations and things.
Well, how that came about was actually a kind of forging a deal with my parents, because they could see that I was set on the musical life, as it were, and I was taking it more seriously and gravitating into better bands and stuff, even before I'd left school. And they kind of struck a deal with me to say, if you go to university and get a degree, then after that you can go and do what you like. You can go and be a musician, and we won't hassle you anymore.
And you got a degree in general arts. Yeah?
That's right. It wasn't an honours degree. I was, I just managed to scrape through my A levels through other distractions, but I managed to get into a general degree again at Durham.
Yes, and it's what we call a gentleman's degree. You didn't work too hard.
Absolutely. Well, I was a semi-pro musician in Newcastle all the time. That was going on.
Yeah, so were you playing around so this would be sort of, I don't know, late 60s? Sorry.
Mid to late 60s,
Mid to late 60s. And you were playing, what were you playing then, and what was the group? Because I presume it was a different group than the Cyclones.
Yeah, it was. The Cyclones, whilst still at school, morphed into the Downtown faction, which was by the time we'd got the blues bug and was starting to listen to and try and emulate blues. We'd sort of picked up on the Rolling Stones. And then the next band I was in after school, I also called that the Downtown faction. Right. But at the same time as all that, I was also moonlighting with a show band in Newcastle, which was just a little 4-piece band, and the two leaders of it were sort of renegades from the trad scene, the local trad band scene, and they were proper jazz players. They were real musicians, and it was the two of them and a drummer and me. I'd responded to an advert on the guitar shop wall, and I found myself the weekend bass player with the Burt Brown show band.
I used to love show bands. I used to go and see, because I'm just a couple of years younger than you, and I used to go and see in the 1960s a show band in Manchester, and I always remember them doing Do the Huckle Buck. I don't know if that was one you used to do.
It rings a bell, actually.
Do the Hucklebuck, do the Hucklebuck, you're something, and you do the Hucklebuck. And I used to go to the Co-op ballroom. I know it's not about me, but just tell you this. As you were in a show band. And
shared experiences,
well,
mate.
Precisely. You very rarely get the chance to talk about show bands. And I used to, the CIS ballroom in Manchester, the Cooperative Insurance Society, had one of those springy dance floors.
Oh, yeah.
So when they did Do the Hucklebuck and various other show band, stomping tunes, it used to bounce up and down, which was great fun.
Oh, yeah, I bet, yeah.
And, of course, the bass guitar would have been instrumental, if you pardon the pun, in that sort of action.
Oh, it was indeed. Well, I mean, our show band only being a 4-piece, had quite an important role to play. But one of our gigs was backing the strippers on Sunday lunchtime around the working men's clubs.
Yeah, well, that's it was a Leeds scene as well, I think, Sunday lunchtime strippers.
I'm sure it was, but it was, quite an education for an innocent young lad fresh out of public school.
Right, well, we'll move on to sort of folk rock shortly, but I was interested in your guitar-based history and obviously show band history as well. So we'll move on to Lindisfarne in just a moment, but I want to hear one of your own tunes now. This is Ragtown. Tell me about this one.
Oh, Ragtown, this is from a fairly recent album, the Odd Man Out album, but the story of Ragtown is about the building of the Hoover Dam in the States in the 1930s, which I saw a TV documentary about and inspired me to write this story. And basically it's about the story of the workforce on the dam, who were, miles and miles from anywhere, working in very arduous conditions out in the desert, and essentially at the bottom of a very steep canyon. And a lot of the people that they hired to work there were steeplejacks, people experienced with rope work, including guys that had worked on the tall ships, and also circus people, acrobats and people like that. Right. And at the end of the day's work, they were so far from anywhere, they had to build their own shantytown in the desert, and that's what Ragtown was.
Okay, well, let's hear the tune. Rod Clements, our guest on One-on-One. This is Ragtown.
Well, I'm working in the canyon. I got a shovel in my hand to put it down across the river, bring power to the land. The sun's beating like a hammer, every day the same. Then I lay me down in Ragtown, beneath a blanket on a frame. Well, I was tunneling the bedrock, I thought I had it made, but the heat got to me. They sent the ice brigade. They brought water and a stretcher, laid me off all day, and they sent me back to Ragtown, and I got no pay. Well, there's a jumbo drilling and a spoil heap filling. It's 97 in the shade, but there's a great day coming when the turbine's humming. If we only get the damn thing made. Sometimes I get to wonder if I can make it through. I hear the dynamite thunder, I see the wrecking crew, but St. Peter, don't you worry, send me anywhere, long as it ain't Ragtown, then I don't care. Well, there's a scale man swinging and a pickhead ringing. Don't it look a long way down? But keep your hat on tight, you're gonna be alright if you only keep your feet on the ground. Come on, little honey, come on and say you will. I got enough to get a house built up in Vaudeville. I'll pay a quarter on the dollar to the company man, and if he gets us out of Ragtown, I'll do it if I can. If it gets us out of Ragtown, I'll do it if I can. If it gets us out of Ragtown, I'll do it if I can.
Excellent. That's Rod Clements, who's our guest on One-on-One this afternoon, and Ragtown, which is the kind of stuff I'm suspecting you'll be able to hear if you go along to the Halifax Square Chapel Arts Centre, Saturday, 30th of November. I mean, presumably that's still part of your repertoire. It's a stomping great tune, Rod.
Oh, thanks, Martin. Yes, it certainly is. I usually finish the first set with that, actually.
Yeah, really, but very American sounding. Presumably, I don't know at what stage you got into American music, because we're going to move on to Lindisfarne, which of course is folk rock and I suppose very British. But at the time, you know, when you were forming your early bands, it sounds as American music that influenced you most.
Well, at the very beginning, it nearly all was. I mean, even the Shadows were a very American-influenced genre.
Yeah.
You know, the twangy
like
guitars.
The Ventures, weren't they?
Exactly. Yeah, very much like that. I mean, you know, I'm not going to say who came first. I think there was quite a lot of cross-influence there. But I was also very into the Ventures and Duane Eddy and what later became known as surf guitar, twanging guitar,
yeah.
And then, you know, rock and roll guitar. But when I first started getting into music back in those days, it was a funny period as far as singing was concerned. It was after the first flush of the greats of rock and roll, you know, after Elvis and Little Richard and all that, but before the next wave of the Beatles and the Stones and all that. And the singing I didn't think was up to much at that time. I thought singing was basically something that sissies did. And I was only interested in the guitar playing and the guitar solos, and that kind of stuck with me for quite a long time until I heard the blues, really.
Yeah. Well, tell me about the next tune that we're going to hear that you've chosen, Rod, is Meet Me on the Corner by Lindisfarne, which brought you huge success. Tell me about Lindisfarne, how that all started.
Well, Lindisfarne kind of formed out of the ashes of the Downtown faction. We were the Downtown faction was a blues band playing around Tyneside, and then we found it getting harder to get gigs. We were kind of stuck in a bit of a rut and not getting anywhere. So we had a bit of a relaunch. We rechristened the band Brethren. We started doing more of our own songs, and we started playing more acoustic stuff, and went out into the folk clubs and started doing floor spots and things, which is where we met a singer-songwriter called Alan Hull, who, similarly to ourselves, had a beat group and a rock background, but had gravitated to the folk clubs for similar reasons.
Was there quite a folk scene around? Because there usually has been over the years around the northeast.
There was. It was great, actually. There were loads of folk. Just about every little town had a folk club, and there were several in Newcastle, several around Gateshead. I mean, it used to be often said that a visiting folk singer could come and work on Tyneside and do a different gig every night for a fortnight.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. So there you got into the folk rock scene. Meet Me on the Corner, that was the one that won the Ivan Novello Award for you. And I suppose, was that the one that really kicked it all off for Lindisfarne?
It was. It wasn't our first release. The first album came out in 1970, Nicely Out of Tune. A couple of singles were released from that, and it got a lot of critical approval, but didn't make any chart placings. But when the Fog on the Tyne album came out the year after, Meet Me on the Corner was the lead single from that, and that was
massive, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Top 5, depending on which chart you look at. You know, it was up to number 2 in some of them, I believe.
Well, I was always a New Musical Express man, so
all right. Well,
I think it was top 5 New Musical Express.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But I mean, so you were suddenly a pop star. I mean, you were suddenly a huge pop star. 1973. You've been 26 years old. What was it like to, from being in bands playing around the northeast, you're an internationally famous pop star? What was that like?
It was quite funny because in some ways it was what we were expecting. You know, it's what would
really
it vindicated our decisions. We said, we said, well, we told you so. You know, there you go. We were right.
You knew you'd written a sort of stonking great hit then at that stage?
I knew it was a good song. I didn't know it was a stonking great hit. You get a feeling about songs. Sometimes you're wrong. You know, sometimes you can have a feeling about a song and it doesn't do anything. But I definitely had a feeling about that one.
Yeah, and you did presumably Top of the Pops, and you married at that stage. So you got married quite young.
I did get married. I was married really at the beginning of the band. Alan and I were both married. We both had young families. at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it must have been a difficult balancing act, I would have thought, because from nowhere, really, you're suddenly on top of the pops, and rather than doing small clubs, you're selling out big concert halls. And it's the days before arenas, wasn't it? But they're still big venues, universities presumably.
We did universities, big unions, and we did concert hall tours. We did a couple of tours that were actually arranged by Charisma, our record label, and we toured with Van der Graaf Generator, who a lot of people remember, and of course Genesis, who everybody remembers. The three bands together went out on the road as a tour. The Charisma 6 Bob tour, it was called, because it was 6 shillings.
Well, Charisma had that credibility, didn't it? I mean, Charisma was the sort of label that appealed to A-level students and kids at university, didn't it?
It was a great label. It really was a creative. I won't say hothouse, because that makes it sound a bit too high pressurised, a bit X Factor or something. But because it wasn't like that. But it was a very creative, very encouraging environment, all under the aegis of Tony Stratton Smith,
yes,
who was a lovely man.
Yeah, that's right. And people mentioned him and referenced him in their tunes. I mean, I think it was either Monty Python or Viv Stanshall. I can't remember who it was who was on Charisma. Was it Viv Stanshall and the Bonzo Dog Band on Charisma?
Monty Python were.
Monty Python it was on Charisma, yes. And they used to name check Tony Stratton Smith at various points.
Oh, yeah, every chance they got, because he was a lovely guy. But yes, very proud to be stablemates with Monty Python and co.
Yeah, and I'm presuming you've seen the news that they're doing another tour. They're going to play arenas.
I did. Well, I didn't know they were doing a tour. I knew they were going to do the O2, but it's going to be extended. Is it? It's going to be a...
Well, I might be wrong, but I know they're definitely in the O2. They're in big arenas, and it's
good for them. I do remember John Cleese phoning up Charisma one day to ask what chart position their new album was, and they told him, it's 24 or something, and he was quite miffed and disappointed. 24, is that all? And they said, well, that's great, John, that's great. It's only just out. It'll go a lot further yet. So, all right then. Yeah. And he phoned back about an hour later and said, what number is it now?
Well, those albums are great. There's like Matching Tie and Handkerchief and another one too. They're really, really good. And there's just some of them played twice on different, if you pick the right groove.
Yeah.
Great days. And great days for yourself. We'll hear the tune now. And we've teased people for long enough. This is Lindisfarne. Meet me on the corner.
Came along just to bring you this song.
radio record, that 15-second intro, 2 minutes 36 seconds long, and ends dead. Brilliant. Lindisfarne. I'm only saying that, Rod, because I've played it so many times on the radio.
Oh, good. Well, keep up the good work.
Because you get the royalties, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
Rod Clements, who wrote that, is our guest on One on BBC Radio Leeds this afternoon. It's Martin Kelner with you through till 3 o'clock with Rod. And presumably, when people go to see you in Halifax at the Square Chapel Arts Centre, you'll have a nod to the past of Lindisfarne, will you?
I will indeed. Yes, of course. I'll be playing that one. Don't worry. Yeah. No fears about that.
Well, people would be disappointed if you didn't.
They certainly would. Yeah, and a few other of the Lindisfarne ones that I've contributed. Sort of album tracks and stage favourites and so forth, and some new stuff and some middle-aged stuff. You name it, we'll do it.
Did you ever, when you were forming those early bands at school and then through uni and everything, did you ever dream that you would still be doing it into your mid-60s? Because it was a sort of young person's business in those days.
It was, and I don't think I really did imagine that I would still be doing it now, but I didn't really think that far ahead. I don't think kids do really when they're that age, especially when you've got your enthusiasms and you're following your star and all that kind of thing. But if I thought about it, I mean, by my sort of late teens, early 20s, the blues was becoming a big influence on me, and I started to notice that some of the guys playing that music were no spring chickens. They'd been around for a while. They weren't. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be a pop star, a pop singer, a pop performer, then you'd have a limited shelf life. And the done thing then seemed to be to go into musicals or to go into cabaret or something.
Tommy Steele's been here he's here in Leeds now playing Scrooge in a musical. And
well, there you go, Scrooge. Who would have thought it? Tommy Steele playing Scrooge. Well,
well, it is amazing in that I can remember interviews with the Beatles where they said, when they were 21, 22, and they said, well, we'll probably carry this on to about 25 and then become all-round entertainers, because that was the sort of career path, wasn't it, for pop stars?
It was, yeah. I remember Ringo talking about opening a chain of hairdressing salons or something like that.
It's getting a bit Spinal Tap now.
Yeah, I'm afraid so, yeah.
So we're going to go into play a blues track now. As you rightly said, blues music, it seemed to be the convention that blues musicians could go on forever, whereas pop, your career was over at the age of 30. You got into blues quite early. How did that happen? Because there wasn't a lot of it. We're going to play Howlin' Wolf in a second.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah,
great.
It's brilliant. It's great. It's marvellous. But there wasn't a lot of it about on the radio. I can never remember hearing this on the Light programme.
Oh, really? Right, yeah, well, good on them. Well, how I got into it was really because through the kind of musical revolution of the early 60s, which the Beatles were part of, and then the Stones came along, and those of us who were feeling a bit left field and unconventional, wanting to rebel, you kind of shifted your allegiance from the Beatles to the Stones because they were hairier and scruffier and played hairier, scruffier music, which sounded even more fun. But to their lasting credit, the Stones always told you where they got the music from.
Yes.
They always quoted their sources and praised them and gave you that clue as to where it came from. And so we found out about Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, even Chuck Berry, because he had been a rock and roll star.
Yeah. But I think the Stones' first hit was a Chuck Berry song, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. But we found out about all of these guys, the Chicago blues and then later the old country blues, the Delta blues and everything, because of the Stones, and then following the leads back, reading record sleeves, picking up names, checking them out. It just revealed a whole hidden culture. It was hidden at the time. You couldn't find it.
It was because there was. I mean, there was. I try to explain this to my kids sometimes, but there was no internet. You ended up going to. I know in Manchester we had a shop called Rare Records, and you ended up going to a shop that you knew stocked a bit of specialist material, and just saying, "Have you got anything by this name that you'd read on album sleeves.
Yes, exactly. In Newcastle, it was J&G Windows in the arcade, still going strong. I'm glad to say, but they had a great jazz and blues and folk section as well. Had a lot of imports. Those old American Vanguard albums with the stiff cardboard covers and very heavy vinyl.
Yeah.
But I mean, stuff like Robert Johnson, who people nowadays take for granted. You know, you can find Robert Johnson records anywhere. The record, never mind Johnson himself, the records were mythical beings.
Yes.
Anybody who had that, you know, it was a rare thing indeed.
Okay, well, let's hear it now. Smokestack Lightning by Howlin' Wolf.
Great.
Well, there's something you don't hear nearly enough. That's Howlin' Wolf and Smokestack Lightning. On One-on-One on BBC Radio Leeds, the choice of Rod Clements, who's our one-on-one guest today. Rod, you know, you had this huge success with Meet Me on the Corner, and then Lindisfarne split up in 1973. Musical differences? What was what happened there?
It kind of was musical differences, really, but there were social and personal differences as well, shall we say. Alan was the foremost songwriter in the band, although I'd written Meet Me on the Corner, which was the kind of breakthrough one. Alan was by far the more prolific writer, and he found it hard to write under pressure, but the band was touring such a lot that he was getting fed up with touring. He didn't feel it was a very creative way to be going on. We kind of agreed on a compromise where he would stay at home and write, and we would go on the road and play the songs. But that never actually happened. And we, the original lineup called it a day. Alan and Ray Jackson carried on for a bit with a new lineup, and Ray Laidlaw and Simon Cow and myself formed a band called Jack the Lad.
Yes, and had a fair bit of success, and played some reasonably big places with them, and were quite popular. But
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, but you also, at the same time, you were doing some work with other musicians. I know your hit-making career was far from over because you played on Ralph McTell's Streets of London.
I did, yes. After Jack the Lad, I was kind of a bit fed up with groups and being in bands and things generally, so I decided to try my hand as a freelance, just as a session man. And the first person I actually was approached by to play with was Michael Chapman.
Right.
And I did a tour with Michael, and while I was doing that, I met up with Ralph McTell, who I'd previously, I wouldn't say I knew him, but I'd met and got on well with him back in the folk club days.
Yeah. And you also worked with Bert Jansch a bit, who I can remember from when I was at university was an absolutely almost legendary figure amongst folkies and people who like progressive rock at university. I seem to remember.
And guitar players especially. Yeah. I mean, Bert was a huge idol of mine. He was one of the few people who, to me, kind of incorporated both the romance of the blues, that sort of exotic, and the the kind of straining at the edges kind of thing that the blues has, with the melody of folk. He combined the two things for me, and he was a huge influence on me, as he was on countless other guitar players. And it was through Ralph that I got to play with Bert, and Bert and I formed a very strong musical relationship, which lasted 2 or 3 years. He actually came and lived in my house.
Well, I was going to ask, actually, did you manage all this? And we talked about Lindisfarne and the fact that you were on the road with them and everything. Did you manage all this from the northeast, or did you have to move down to London?
We moved down to London collectively at the beginning of Lindisfarne. It was actually a condition of signing for Charisma that we had to move to. Well, it was fair enough,
And you moved with. You had a young family at that stage, presumably.
One daughter, yeah. Wife and a baby daughter. But we all moved down with our up camp and moved down there, and the rest of the band kind of moved back up north in dribs and drabs. But I stayed down there through Lindisfarne, through Jack the Lad, and through the kind of session phase, if you like. And I was based in London when I was working with Ralph and Bert and Michael. And in fact, my first marriage broke up round about that time, and Bert was between relationships, shall we say, so he came and hung his hat at my house for a while, and we had a kind of, like the odd couple kind of thing.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. So, I mean, your marriage, you say, broke up. It's all amicable now, and you're now a granddad, etc., etc. But at the time, because you'd had the split with Lindisfarne, and a little bit of sort of antipathy with Alan Hull and all that, and then your marriage breaking up as well, and you had a daughter. It must have been quite a difficult. What part of London were you in? Were you sort of...
I was in North London. I was in Finchley.
Right.
Yeah, I had a little son by this time as well. I had two kids from my first.
That must have
marriage.
been a really difficult time, I would have thought.
It wasn't easy, but I mean, the ends of marriages, the ends of relationships are never going to be easy, and it's a very difficult life to juggle, the life of the musician and family. The stability of a family. You're not going to be home every night. You're not going to be the usual dad that's around for the young kids, and there is much of that I regret. But I consider myself very fortunate that my kids have turned out great. They're both fantastic.
Either of them in the music business at all?
No, my son dabbled for a bit, but he didn't pursue it. He works in Nottingham now. He's a psychiatric social worker, which I'm very proud of him for doing.
Well, it's always handy to have one in the family. You never know when you have to call on him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we've taken you down to London and Finchley, so it's quite appropriately leads into the next track you've chosen, which is Ralph McTell.
Have you seen the old man in the closed down market, kicking up the paper with his worn-out shoes. In his eyes you see no pride, and held loosely at his side, yesterday's paper telling yesterday's news. So how can you tell me you're lonely and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London, show you something to make you change your mind. Have you seen the old girl who walks the streets of London? Dirt in her hair and her clothes in rags. She's no time for talking, she just keeps right on walking, carrying her home in 2 carrier bags. So how can you tell me you're lonely and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London, show you something to make you change your mind. In the all-night cafe at 11:15, same old man sitting there on his own, looking at the world over the rim of his teacup. Each tea lasts an hour and he wanders home alone. So how can you tell me you're lonely? Don't say for you that the sun don't shine. Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London, show you something to make you change your mind. Have you seen the old man outside the Seaman's Mission? Memory fading with the metal ribbons that he wears. In our winter city, the rain cries a little pity for one more forgotten hero and a world that doesn't care. So how can you tell me you're lonely and say for you that the sun don't shine? Let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London, show you something to make you change your mind.
Well, it's been ruined by so many buskers, you sort of forget how good a record that was. Ralph McTell's Streets of London, the bass guitarist on that. Rod Clements is our guest on One on One. Is that part of your repertoire? Will people hear that in Halifax tomorrow night?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't dream of covering Ralph's ground. I went and saw him just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, he's on. I think he might still be on tour, but he was. Yeah. I saw him up our way up in Alnwick, and he was great. Really, really good performance.
Yeah. Well, it was Christmas #1 in 1974. That.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what sort of audiences you attract these days, Rod. I mean, are they young people, or are there people who do go from a nostalgia point of view because they remember Lindisfarne from way back?
Depends on the venue, really. I mean, I play quite a lot of sort of folk venues that they tend to attract an older audience, although they're trying hard to bring younger people in, and there's certainly plenty of young folk musicians around that should be bringing them in. But the places like the Square Chapel in Halifax, the more sort of arts centre places, it's a really mixed audience. It covers the full spectrum. because I think the kind of music that I'm into, the kind of music that I've always been associated with, rootsy, folky, bluesy kind of stuff, it's never gone away really, but it's certainly enjoying a resurgence with younger people now. And you see this in the influence of people like Bert, like Bert Jansch, who he's sadly no longer with us. But when he passed away just a couple of years ago, there was a huge outpouring of respect and tributes, and from all kinds of quarters. From very what you'd think of as being like young, cutting edge musicians, which is great.
Yes, I can remember all that in the Guardian. I think it was a big obit as well. Yeah, I mean. In 1977, Lindisfarne reformed, and then had quite a long history after that before you went solo again. But presumably reformed with different people.
No, the 1977 reformation was the original lineup. All 5 originals. Yeah.
And you stayed together for some time after that.
Another 25 years.
Yeah.
Just about, much longer than the first time around.
Indeed, but now, as we say, you're doing your solo stuff, and the next track we're going to hear is from an album from 2000, I think, Stamping Ground.
Yeah.
Tell us about this track. We're just about to hear it.
It's Stamping Ground is the title track of the album, and it was my first proper solo effort. It was my first solo album of all new material, and Stamping Ground was the song itself, and the reason I used it as the title, kind of a mission statement in a way. Kind of this is where I'm at. I feel like I've come home.
Indeed, and here's the track.
Everywhere around this land, I'm as beat up as the road map in my hand. Times I've thought I couldn't take much more, but now I've found what I've been looking for. I'm gonna sit and cool my heels, I just like the way it feels. Gonna take my time and learn to sit around. Gonna live the way I choose, kick off my traveling shoes. This is gonna be my stamping ground. Well, I found myself a little 2-room shack. I put the money down and I'm never looking back. I might need a lick of paint, but I don't care. 'Cause I don't plan on going anywhere. I'm gonna duck out of the race, gonna cut myself some space, gonna pick and choose and see what's going down. I'm gonna live the way I please, sort the wood out from the trees. This is gonna be my stamping ground. I wanna be where I can walk on down through the greenwood to the sea, and I can get a ride to town, it's not too far, and there's a jumping band come Friday down the bar. Well, I finally got it made, I'm gonna quit the big parade. I've been too long not knowing where I'm bound. I'm gonna sit and take my time, pick the fruit and drink the wine. This is gonna be my stamping ground. Yeah, this is gonna be my stamping ground.
as you say, Rod, that's just kind of a mission statement that basically answers the question I was going to ask you now, which was, comfortable middle age. I know you've been living with the same partner for a few decades now, and a stepdaughter as well.
Yeah.
And you have 3 grandchildren.
Indeed,
so you're sort of, going out doing the music still because you love the music, but away from that, you're a sort of pipe and slippers man in a way.
That's
no,
going,
is that too far? Am I going too far?
That's going a bit too far. Yeah, I like to think I get out and about a bit more than that. I live out in a semi-rural environment, so I get out in the garden, cut wood, and get out in the fresh air and stuff like that.
Still active. I think that what they're saying is 66 is the new 32, really.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Just one final thing. You work as a heritage volunteer at a historic cinema in Newcastle. Just tell me a little bit about that.
I do. Well, the Tyneside Cinema, which is the cinema in question, is an original news theatre cinema from 1937, and it has a very well-loved place in the hearts of a lot of Newcastle people. And in at the end of the 2000s, 2006, 2008, it got closed down and expanded. A big refurbishment programme, restoring all the old bits, putting some new bits on. We've got an extra couple of screens now to bring it well and truly into the 21st century, but celebrate the past as well.
It's great stuff. We love those old cinemas. We've got one in Leeds, the Hyde Park Picture House. Which
I know. I haven't been, but I know of it. I've spoken to them on the phone. Actually, they're nice people. But
it's an excellent place. Excellent. So we're going to have to leave it there, Rod. But bless you for being our guest today. You can see Rod Clements at the Halifax Square Chapel Arts Centre on Saturday 30th. It's been my pleasure to have him as our one-on-one guest today.
Thanks, Martin. Cheers.
And thank you to you, Rod. Rod Clements, our guest on One-on-One. We'll make our run for home now with Lindisfarne.
I've travelled the land with a guitar in my hand and a knife ever hoping for some fun. I've made some mistakes, had my share of the breaks, seen the boys on the make and on the bum. Run for home, run as fast as I can. Oh, running man, running for home. Run for home, run as fast as I can.
Rod Clements from Lindisfarne on BBC Radio Leeds. Today's One-on-One. This is Johnny on a Friday afternoon. Hello, how are you?
West Yorkshire Travel.
BBC